Yep, you all knew this one was coming. I did not want to do this until now because, for one, nobody likes making videos on topics like this. I think, sure, there are maybe some channels that salivate over the idea of a negative video, but I'm not one of them at least. Secondly, the situation was still fluid and evolving, and for all I know, by the time this is published, new details will also be released. And thirdly, yesterday I had sponsored opportunities that I had to attend to, and I was not putting a sponsorship in a video like this, given that that would be a move in incredibly bad taste. So here we are today, several days after the fact. I think at this point, it's fair to say that everyone knows what's going on with the Marathon Art controversy. Most people have seen Anti-Real's post. In fact, at the time of recording this, it is approaching 10 million views on Twitter. That is staggering, and that is pretty damning. More importantly than all of that, it has been confirmed by Bungie that one of their former employees, a former artist, essentially lifted a ton of Anti-Real's portfolio, and lots of those things made it into a texture sheet that then went into the Marathon Alpha. If you look at Anti-Real's post, the stuff is everywhere. I mean, it's indisputable. One-to-one copies of all sorts of different assets and various different decals and graphics that have been plastered all over the game and its surfaces. I mean, it's crazy how much has been stolen. They stole Anti-Real's logo, and I say they not to sit there and assume plurality here, because I'm going to take Bungie's story at face value that it was just one employee, even though Joseph Cross was following Anti-Real for several years, and that in itself is a weirdly suspect detail. That being said, I'm not going to take any further assumptions on this, because I'm going to take the stories as they're presented. I don't know that to be the case. I'm not about to make an accusation on that. That being said, it does not change the situation, and it does not change the fact that Anti-Real has been wronged here. Rightly, the vast majority of the internet came to her defense, and the vast majority of people have absolutely decried the theft that went on thanks to this Bungie employee. Now, to be clear, they're a former Bungie employee. We don't know if that firing or the change of their position within employment was recent, but the point still remains. A former Bungie employee is the one supposedly to blame for all of this. But there is more to it than that. And this is where things really start to unpack themselves, because you know what? This is something which is a team situation. Because yes, whilst it is supposedly one bad apple that spoiled the barrel, they still spoiled the barrel. And inevitably, their work, which was all stolen, would have made it across Joe Cross's desk. That is damning all in itself, and it's frustrating to sit there and know that this was being done probably for years. Let's not forget that the process of developing video games from scratch, even if you have an old IP to base it off of, like Marathon, yeah, that takes years of development, and worlds are built up from the ground with an artistic vision for years before they're even realized within an engine. This means, considering that Anti-Real's portfolio and a lot of the stolen works date all the way back to 2017, that this stuff could have been floating around the studio for who knows how long. It could well have been floating around for half a decade at this point, and nobody noticed. This is even more damning considering that again, Joseph Cross has followed Anti-Real for a long, long time. This stuff would have crossed his desk, would have crossed the desk of multiple other team members, and I'm sure many of them feel terrible right now for not having noticed it. But the failure of not having noticed it is still incredibly damning. Now let's also be clear, this should be even more of a focus for the Marathon team, simply because Bungie has had plagiarism scandals in the past. Now to be really clear, and to be very fair about this, it is not Bungie directly that has had problems like this. It has been 3 instances in which outsourcing agents have plagiarized community material in Destiny, and in all 3 of those instances, Bungie did respond, credit the artist responsible, and made sure that they were compensated for their work. They've done right in those instances. However, having had this happen 3 times creates a really nasty pattern. A pattern that Bungie would have been wise to learn from and implement controls around. It's not clear if they did that, but if they did try, they clearly did not do a good enough job at it. Because this happened. And this was not outsourced, this was all internal. And that is the serious problem with all of this. There is no one else they can lay the blame at the feet of. This is on Bungie's art team as a whole. And yes, it may be one individual, but if this stuff has been swimming around for that long, and nobody noticed, no one brought it up, and if they were literally following the source on social media, then yeah, I view that as a problem. To say that this is a mess would be a gross understatement. Any goodwill that Marathon had garnered within the core gaming community has quickly gone out the window of the 37-story building. Anti-Real's post on the matter, again on Twitter as of me recording this, has been seen over 10 million times. 10 million. That is a kind of gaming marketing that you do not generally see. And all of it was for free, and all of it was bad press. The wider gaming community is now very well aware, and to say that nobody is impressed is also a gross understatement. This, I think, was summarized pretty well on the Bungie livestream that happened literally a day or so after the controversy went live, where Joe Ziegler and Joseph Cross were joined by various other devs, and they came along to apologize with regards to this incident. Now, credit to Joe Cross and the entire Bungie team for wanting to address this at the very top of the stream, but I think that there needs to be more to this, because much like a lot of the people on the internet are saying, it seems very clear that the correct thing to confirm right away is not just to simply say that all of this will be investigated and that the results of that investigation will be made public and that changes will be made to rectify things, but it's also simply to say, yes, we will compensate Anti-Real for her stolen work. How you come to the value of that is a different question, but to say that you will do it, to commit to it, is what's very important about this. Many members of the core Bungie community were still far from impressed, and one of the most written slogans within that stream was simply, "Plagiarism will make me God." A play on one of the key marketing phrases for Marathon, which is "Escape will make me God." This... oh my god, this was just painful. And not just watching the chat either. There were mic issues, desync issues between video and audio. At moments people's audio was muted and then it would be unmuted and then other people's voices would echo. I mean, god, this was the worst impression you could have given. And I'm really sorry to say it because there were developers that I've met in that call before. Developers like Lars Bakken, who comes across as a really nice guy. But the audio issues on top of all this, it presented an image of a studio that is not well put together and is really sloppy and kind of got caught. God, it's the most awkward thing I've seen in a long, long time, and it just sucks. So, that's kind of what's happened. The dust has settled. Where are we now? Well, to put it frankly, things are not great. Bungie has burned a ton of goodwill in the process of this controversy. And it sucks, because not only, of course, was Anti-Real's art stolen, and she is the real immediate victim of all this, and should be rightly compensated, but also, if this was the action of a single person, and it doesn't go any wider than that, then I am mad on behalf of the rest of the employees at Bungie too. They are all unfairly getting tarred with the same brush now, because most of them are not in the art department and might not even be working on Marathon. They had nothing to do with this. Bungie is a studio now of about 850 odd people, and if everything about Bungie's story checks out, and it was just this one guy, every single one of them has been tarnished by a single former employee. And you know what? That sucks too. I know we don't have a lot of sympathy for Bungie as a general right now, but I think it's really important to separate the different facets of the company. It's important to understand that I'm separating the former art team member who I have less sympathy for than dirt, from the people who are not working on Marathon, who are just doing their 9-to-5 jobs, and are currently experiencing what has been described by Paul Tassi as a complete morale collapse. It's also important to differentiate them from the C-suite, who of course are going to sit in their ivory towers and mostly be completely unaffected by this. That sucks too. And secondly, yeah, it is an institutional failure and we should be disappointed. There is no denying that Bungie's art department should have caught this long before it even made its way into the alpha. And the fact that it happened after 3 other similar controversies is just so infuriating. For the game itself, with the gaming community at large and the core Bungie community, you initially had a gaming reception that was already giving a mixed response. Marathon was already in a bit of a shaky position in these 5 months running up to launch. Certainly not unsalvageable, but definitely not ideal. Something that could be solved, but only with quite a bit of effort. For what it's worth, I put 30 plus hours into the closed alpha that Marathon had recently, and whilst it's clear that it's missing important flesh on the bones, I think those bones are actually solid, contrary to popular online opinions. Combine that with the knowledge that the alpha build in question was several months old, and I feel like more progress might have been made in those 5 months till release than we might have anticipated. But now, that mixed sentiment in the gaming landscape has become actively hostile. With Marathon being a paid premium product, Bungie's job has got even harder than it already was. It's at this point that the response to all of this is really up for discussion, and I've seen plenty of people say the game should just be cancelled and that immediately everyone should just go back to the drawing board and maybe go on and make Destiny 3, and I want to shoot down that sentiment immediately because boy oh boy does that not work. There is so much investment behind creating any new franchise that to just abandon it at the last minute is insane. It's the reason why games like Hyenas that were cancelled literally in the last lap before their release are such oddities. Not to mention, there are 800 plus jobs at stake at Bungie, as well as countless contractors that work with them on a day-to-day basis. Cancelling a game that's had as much investment into it as Marathon is simply not an option. If you cancel Marathon, at bare minimum, there will be a ton of layoffs. That is it. It is as simple as that. And if you are sitting there and you are cynical enough to call for people to just cancel the project entirely, then you need to reassess whether it would be different if it was your job on the line. And that is what you are asking for when you say cancel this game. To be really clear, I understand the sentiment. The fact that plagiarism helped build Marathon is disgusting. But it is also one of those moments where if you're looking for a response beyond the typical vitriol and the nonsense that happens on the internet, you can't just simply hit the cancel button and expect that there will be no consequences. Because let me tell you, I'm pretty sure that a ton of people at Bungie are equally disgusted that plagiarism went on behind the scenes. And yeah, they're the ones who can both be disgusted and will also suffer for it. So no, you're not alone in this boat. Bungie's population of developers is probably also disgusted and frustrated at it. Because you know what? They're also creatives. They have a lot more in common with Anti-Real than I think a lot of us are willing to admit. The idea of cancelling the game is not a viable one if they are going to keep their jobs. And if we're going to care about the heart of the situation today, after we have taken the appropriate time to sit there and think about how Anti-Real needs to be rightly compensated, we need to sit there and think about how everyone deserving in that studio is going to keep their job, and how anyone who helped make this happen is going to face repercussions. We should not sit there and see those repercussions extend to the entire studio that has had nothing to do with it. So we're not cancelling Marathon in an ideal world. Where do we go from here? Well, with the mess that's on our hands, I think the only option that Bungie realistically has if they want to make sure that the game launches successfully is to delay it. And that's not ideal either, because a cancellation will definitely cause layoffs, but a delay might not be on the table, and it may cause layoffs too. Sony has already paid for Marathon. They invested over $3 billion into Bungie, and they want to make sure that they see a return on their investment. Bungie's release schedule is probably set in stone at this point in time. They made promises to Sony to ensure that they would have a great number of live service games and the ability to steward other studios into creating live service games. The latter part of that has not worked out, so Marathon and Destiny are realistically the pillars on which that investment lies. And ultimately, Those pillars look kind of shaky at current. Especially after this, Marathon is in a lot of trouble. I don't know if a delay is going to happen. I feel like it should if they want to be able to address some of the problems, but ultimately, we might still see the unchanging September release date. But if we do delay, what's the advantage of that? Well, the first one is the most obvious. It gives time for Bungie to respond to the controversy in full, publish the full results of their investigation, do right by Anti-Real with compensation and accreditation within Marathon itself, and to reset the narrative around all of this. As long as you have people spamming "plagiarism will make me God" in Twitch chats, you are not going to get away from this. It is going to be the thing that hangs over the game all the way to release. It needs to be very, very clear that Bungie is turning the page and doing right by the artist. There needs to be a definitive break that is so undeniable that it is clear that Marathon is charting a new course. If Bungie wants to escape things like that, generally that reset of the conversation is the goal. And this is why I say I think publishing the results of their internal investigation is the bare minimum. A generous settlement to Anti-Real is probably expected as well. Only then can they start to talk about the game's other aspects and how they might rework them or tighten them up. This tightening up can probably include a shift on community pain points that Bungie has supposedly not been willing to move on. Although that is something that I hope will change if leadership now has their feet to the fire, as is probably the case. Paul Tassi had an article recently claiming that leadership at Bungie has been unwilling to move on a bunch of points because the big old boy opinions at Bungie most certainly do seem to think they know best. So no, I think that is something where the internal discussion needs to change to solid action that has been shown. I think Cross put it best. The time for planning is over. They need to decide on things that they're doing, they need to then go and do them, work on them, confirm it with the community, be transparent about it in the process of development. Proximity chat, solo queuing, showing off the wow factor that'll be the real reason to purchase Marathon over a better positioned extraction shooter. And let me be really clear, there are a lot of those right now. But this is the goal that they are going to want to push for if they want to change the conversation. Bold decisions need to be made, not just to align with community sentiment, but also to win it back. As for whether or not that's possible, that's a value judgment for each person individually. I know I've seen some people sit there and say they want nothing to do with this game, and you know what? I can't sit there and blame them. There are going to be people who have completely lost faith in Bungie after this. There are going to be people who will never buy a game from the studio again. There are going to be people who never want to play the game again. This, I think, will have changed things. There are people who are not coming back. The best that can be done now is to change the game for the people who might come back. I've seen some people say that the time of a delay could be used to completely rewrite the visual aesthetic of the game. And I'm going to be real. I'm not a game developer, but I'm pretty sure that that is asking for the impossible. Not only is it something that you can't just whip up out of nowhere within a few hours on Photoshop, but it also requires deciding on a new cohesive direction for the entirety of the game's aesthetic. That is a long development process, something that genuinely takes years of exploration and development. Whilst a lot of the design aesthetic feels like it's very similar to Anti-Real's work, again, I would note that the aesthetic themes in New Marathon are based in pre-existing genres like graphic realism, and again, that predates Anti-Real's work. So no, I don't think Marathon should completely abandon the aesthetic, although I understand why that argument is being made. However, the aesthetic is genuinely not Anti-Real's alone, it is a sub-kind of art. And whilst I understand the frustration, it is certainly not fair to sit there and say they should rewrite the entire graphic book of how Marathon should look. It might seem mad to suggest that Marathon needs something more in this moment, but I don't think that it is. Just because of how bad the sentiment feels right now. I don't know how bad it really is going to be because we can't judge how much this is going to affect sales. But honestly, at this moment in time, based on feeling and value judgments from that alone, it seems as though Marathon needs the Realm Reborn Final Fantasy XIV treatment. They need a moment where they can sit down with the community, break from the old perception, and try and chart a new course. But there's more to this. Because as a creator who has worked with Bungie regularly, and as a person who has covered their games for the last 10 years, man, I am so tired. Unforced errors are nothing new to Bungie, but it feels like we have been relearning the same lessons for a decade now. There's always something ridiculous that happens, and the whole studio gets tarred by the stupidity of a few people. More often than not, it's the C-suite. Sometimes it's individual employees. Sometimes it's harassment suits. Regardless of the case, the damage this does to Bungie's reputation is tangible in the sales of their games and the reputation of the studio's name in the wider gaming community. This stuff takes moments to materialize and years to fix. The frustrating part is that the constant bad news train around the studio is 9 out of 10 times avoidable, and in broad terms, the victims of these mistakes are Bungie employees who aren't to blame at all, who have been working hard to create games that we love. This time, of course, the real victim is Anti-Real, and she should be compensated fully, and whoever did steal her art, I hope they get sued. I don't even know if that is a possibility, but I hope it happens, because you know what? They've helped not only steal someone's art and probably make a salary off of doing it, but they've also helped to tank a reputation of a studio. But again, it's not just Anti-Real when you look at the big picture, because when harassment lawsuits are involved, when layoffs come around, when the C-suite of executives is generally being terrible and disconnected from reality, or when there are other instances of plagiarism by outsourced teams that the studio gets work from, the suffering falls on the employees at Bungie. The community around Bungie is still reeling from the layoffs that shook the studio after the final shape. The situation sucked. They delivered what at the time was one of the best rated games of the entire year. There was talk about whether the final shape would end up being a Game of the Year contender, a Destiny expansion as Game of the Year. That's insanity. It just shows how good Final Shape was, and they laid people off anyway. The people at the studio working their day-to-day, however, they continued onwards. They picked themselves up, and they kept making the games. But this isn't the first or even the second time that this has happened, because at this point it feels unending. I don't know how to end a recording like this. Every time I've tried to end this video for the last 5 minutes or so, I've had to restart, because I can't help but get angry. I've taken verbal jabs at the people who decided that they could get away with plagiarism. I've been angry with regards to the way that the studio has been treating its employees. At this moment in time, there is one truth that I can say across every single one of these recordings, though, none of which will make it into the video except maybe this one. I'm tired. I'm so tired of all this. And I know we all are, because we've all suffered through this nonsense. Not just people in the community who sit there and have to endure the embarrassment of playing Destiny and being a part of this community in general, because you know what? Sometimes it is held over our head like an embarrassment. I am sick and tired for the people who work at Bungie, who have done nothing but create great works in the gaming space their entire career, who are tarred by brushes like this, and who have to sit through all of this and just pretend that it's all going to be okay, when they know that their previous workmates have been laid off, when they understand that they could be next. Bungie needs a real captain of the ship right now. They need someone who's going to tighten things up. They need someone who's going to help them take accountability. And right now they have no one, as best I can see, because if they had someone, this wouldn't have happened. Whoever that captain is supposed to be, I hope they step up soon, because there are team leads holding their teams together in their own hands. I've heard horror stories about the amount of stuff that people have had to do moving mountains in order to make things work. I have seen the amount of passion that they have put into the game, and there are personal stories I am not going to recite here. To put it really bluntly, they deserve better than this. And to all those who are responsible for theft from Anti-Real, for all those who made this mess, for everyone who has put everyone's jobs in jeopardy, I hope it was worth it, you useless, spineless thief. You can catch me back with regular content. I will be back at some point soon. Heck, maybe I'll even stream today. Right now I'm recording this in the morning. Hopefully things will be better by the time it's published at night. In the meantime, though, my name is Bife. Per Audacia ad Astra. I'll see you Starside.